Throughout history, endogamy has been a recurring practice among elites seeking to consolidate power and preserve lineages considered pure. From the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to European monarchies, this strategy left a profound impact on the politics, society, and biology of those who adopted it. Historical examples, such as Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg monarch, reflect the consequences of these decisions. His fragile health and numerous genetic problems not only marked the end of a dynasty, but also revealed the limits of a practice that defied natural laws. In ancient Egypt, figures like Pharaoh Tutankhamun, born of a sibling union, highlight another side of this reality, a pursuit of control that often led to personal tragedies and significant consequences for their reigns. But why did the world's most influential elites persist in such a risky practice?
Gods and kings, endogamy at the heart of ancient Egypt. The practice of endogamy in ancient Egypt was not merely a tradition, but an essential component of the pharaonic power structure. In this civilization, which spanned over 3 millennia, the royal family not only governed, but embodied the will of the gods. The pharaoh, seen as a living deity, was required to preserve the purity of his lineage to maintain his divine connection. This often involved keeping marriages within the same family. From the early days of unified Egypt under Nama around 3100 BCE, the pharaoh was perceived as an intermediary between gods and men. This divine perception of power justified unique practices like endogamy. However, it was in later periods, especially during the Ptolemaic dynasty, 305 to 30 BCE, that this practice became more institutionalized, shaping both politics and religion. One of the most notable examples is Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who married his sister Arsinoe II. This union was not random, but a carefully designed strategy to emulate the gods Isis and Osiris, who were also siblings and represented the perfection of cosmic order in Egyptian mythology. Marrying his sister not only reinforced his divine image, but also ensured that power and wealth remained within the royal family's inner circle. The case of Cleopatra VII, Egypt's last queen, illustrates how this tradition evolved to serve both religious and political purposes. A product of generations of close relative marriages, Cleopatra also married 2 of her younger brothers to preserve dynastic continuity. Despite these unions, she distinguished herself through political acumen and intelligence, becoming one of the most iconic figures in Egyptian history. However, the effects of endogamy were not solely political or religious. Biology began to exact its toll on later generations. Studies on the mummy of Tutankhamun, who ruled in the 14th century BCE, revealed the devastating consequences of consanguineous unions. Tutankhamun suffered from a deformity known as clubfoot, likely caused by a genetic disorder. He also had other medical conditions such as scoliosis and malaria, which may have contributed to his premature death at around 19 years old. Beyond royal circles, endogamy was also common among lower-class members of isolated agricultural communities. In such societies, limited access to partners outside the family nucleus often resulted in unions between close relatives. However, among royalty, this practice had a clear purpose: to preserve the lineage and consolidate power in contexts where external alliances could pose threats. Endogamy in Egypt was a tool of both control and reverence. Each marriage within the royal family reinforced the notion that the pharaoh was a being apart, a divine figure whose blood could not be mixed with that of common mortals. Yet this attempt to defy natural laws through generations of consanguineous unions came at a price: the biological consequences that ultimately weakened the very dynasties they sought to strengthen.
Endogamy in ancient civilizations, divine lineages, and the price of power. Beyond ancient Egypt, endogamy was a common practice in various civilizations seeking to consolidate their power and reinforce the legitimacy of their rulers. From the Sapa Inca in the Andes to the monarchs of India and the Hawaiian nobility, marriages between close relatives were used as a strategy to preserve lineages considered divine. Although these unions helped strengthen the authority of the elites, their effects were not only political or symbolic. Over time, the genetic consequences began to weaken dynasties, revealing the limits of a practice that, while effective in terms of control, challenged the laws of biology. In the Inca Empire, the figure of the Sapa Inca, or emperor, was considered of divine origin, a direct descendant of the god Inti, the sun. To maintain the purity of their lineage and prevent royal blood from mixing with that of common nobles, the Incas adopted a strict tradition of endogamous marriages. Inca rulers often married their own sisters, thus establishing a system in which only direct descendants of the imperial family could ascend to the throne. This model was key to consolidating power, as it ensured that succession remained within the closest circle of the dynasty. One of the most representative examples of this practice was the case of Huayna Capac, who married his sister Coya. His son Atahualpa, the last Inca emperor before the Spanish conquest, was also born from an endogamous union. While this custom strengthened the sacred nature of Inca power, over time it generated rivalries and internal fragmentations that facilitated the empire's downfall at the hands of the Spanish conquerors. In India, endogamous marriages were not exclusive to royalty, but were part of a broader social system based on the caste structure. The Brahmins, priests, and Rajputs, warriors, adhered to strict marriage norms within their own groups to maintain the purity of their lineage and avoid mixing with castes considered inferior. For the Brahmins, whose authority was based on their connection to the divine, endogamy was seen as a way to preserve their role as guardians of religious and spiritual knowledge. Meanwhile, the Rajputs, a warrior caste that dominated northern India, used this practice to reinforce the exclusivity of their lineage and prevent military power from being diluted through alliances with lower status groups. Over the centuries, this rigid matrimonial system led to high rates of genetic diseases, as certain mutations became more common within castes that had kept their lineage closed for generations. In some communities of modern India, the effects of these endogamous marriages are still visible in the prevalence of hereditary disorders. In ancient Hawaii, the nobility, or alii, viewed endogamy as a means of strengthening their connection with the gods and consolidating their power over the archipelago. In this system, marriages between siblings were not only permitted, but considered the purest way to secure the right to the throne. One of the most extreme cases of this practice was that of Keopuolani, the sacred wife of King Kamehameha I, founder of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Keopuolani descended from a line of monarchs who practiced napoki'i, an endogamous system that ensured only the closest royal descendants could aspire to absolute power. This tradition continued until the arrival of Europeans, when contact with the outside world began to transform Hawaii's political and social structures. However, the genetic impact of generations of endogamous marriages manifested in hereditary diseases and growing fragility within the Hawaiian nobility. The House of Habsburg, one of the most influential dynasties in European history, marked a turning point in the continent's political balance. From its origins in the 11th century, this family consolidated its dominance through strategic alliances and carefully orchestrated marriages, extending its influence from the Iberian Peninsula to the kingdoms of Central Europe. However, its obsession with preserving power within the family triggered biological and political consequences that transformed its story into a legacy of both greatness and decline. Endogamy, adopted as a strategy to maintain purity of blood and ensure internal loyalty, became a systematic practice in the dynasty. One figure who embodies the consequences of this decision is Charles II of Spain, known as the Bewitched. Charles II, who ruled from 1665 to 1700, was born of the union between his father, Philip IV of Spain, and his mother, Mariana of Austria, who were uncle and niece. This union was not unusual for the Habsburgs, but part of a tradition aimed at avoiding external alliances and consolidating power. The genetic impact of these decisions was evident in the Habsburg jaw, an elongated lower jaw and prominent lower lip, visible in portraits across generations. Charles II exhibited not only this physical trait, but also more severe health issues, including cognitive and reproductive deficiencies, which defined his life and reign. Health problems in the dynasty were not limited to Charles II. Historical records and genetic studies reveal a significant increase in stillbirths, infant mortality, and debilitating illnesses within the family. Charles II's inability to produce an heir, despite marrying twice, became a critical turning point. His death in 1700 marked the end of the Habsburg lineage in Spain and triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict involving Europe's major powers in the struggle for control of the Iberian Peninsula. The disputes over the throne highlighted how the Habsburgs' strategy to secure their perpetuity ultimately contributed to their downfall in one of their most important territories. Beyond the political context, the case of the Habsburgs puts into perspective the tension between political decisions and biological consequences. Their obsession with retaining power within the family through generations of consanguineous marriages left an indelible mark on European history and on the genetics of one of its most powerful dynasties. Chained lineages, endogamy in the Asian nobility. In the history of Asia, endogamy was not only a strategy for power, but also a fundamental pillar in preserving the legitimacy of royal lineages. From the emperors of China and Japan to the aristocracy of Korea, noble families restricted marriages to their own circles, ensuring the continuity of their lineage and preventing the influence of external clans. Unlike in Europe, where royal endogamy mainly involved marriages between cousins and uncle-niece unions, in Asia, these practices varied depending on the political structure and cultural traditions of each region. However, they all shared the same purpose: maintaining control of power within a closed elite. Over time, these consanguineous unions led to genetic and social consequences that weakened the adaptability of these dynasties, ultimately affecting their long-term stability. In imperial China, lineage preservation was a matter of state. Although Confucianism promoted lineage separation and prohibited marriage between people with the same surname, the nobility and imperial family followed different rules. Chinese emperors, particularly during the Tang and Ming dynasties, favored marriages within their extended family. While sibling marriage was forbidden, unions between cousins and nieces were common to prevent external clans from influencing the throne. One of the most representative examples was the Ming dynasty, where Emperor Hongwu, the dynasty's founder, established strict regulations on imperial family marriages. His descendants were required to marry within the close nobility to preserve the lineage and prevent external factions from accumulating power. This tradition continued during the Qing dynasty, where Manchu emperors maintained a highly regulated marriage system. Qing princesses typically married nobles from selected Manchu clans, further limiting genetic diversity within the aristocracy. Over time, the effects of endogamy became evident in the imperial family's health, with cases of cognitive deficits and genetic diseases weakening some generations of emperors. In Japan, the imperial lineage is the oldest in the world still in existence, tracing back over 2,600 years. To preserve the purity of the imperial line, marriages were limited to close relatives and members of the nobility, significantly reducing genetic diversity within the royal family. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, the imperial court promoted marriages between cousins and members of aristocratic clans such as the Fujiwara, who controlled imperial family marriages to consolidate their political influence. One of the most emblematic cases of endogamy in Japanese history occurred in the 19th century, when Emperor Komei and his wife, Empress Aisho, were close cousins. Their son, Emperor Meiji, was born with a frail constitution and health problems, leading to a reform in the imperial family's marriage policies in the 20th century. Despite these changes, the Japanese imperial family still faces strict restrictions on whom its members can marry. To this day, only male line descendants can ascend to the throne, maintaining a structure of control similar to that of previous centuries. In Korea, the Joseon dynasty established a highly restrictive elite system in which marriages were carefully controlled. The nobility, known as yangban, could only marry within certain authorized families, gradually reducing genetic diversity within Korea's aristocracy over the centuries. For the royal family, endogamy did not reach the levels seen in other monarchies, but strict rules governed the marriages of kings and princes, who could only wed women from noble families approved by the court. One of the most significant cases was that of King Yongjo, who, while not marrying close relatives, came from generations of unions within the tightly controlled Joseon elite. His son, Prince Sado, was a clear example of the psychological effects of endogamy in Asian royalty. He suffered from extreme paranoia and uncontrolled violence, leading his own father to condemn him to death by confinement in a rice chest. As Korea modernized its social structure in the late 19th century, noble marriage restrictions were eased, allowing greater integration of lineages with families outside the traditional elite. Endogamy in Asian nobility reinforced dynastic authority and ensured the continuity of royal lineages. But it also had long-term consequences. Just as in Europe and Egypt, these practices reduced the genetic adaptability of elites, leading to health problems, both physical and psychological, in later generations. The isolation of the aristocracy and the limitation of their marriages to specific groups ultimately weakened the stability of some dynasties, exposing their vulnerabilities when facing internal crises or foreign invasions. As Asia's empires evolved, the need to open lineages to greater genetic diversity became evident. However, the traces of centuries of endogamy can still be found in the history of these dynasties, leaving behind a legacy of power, tradition, and the limitations of a strategy that, while effective in its time, came with a cost that could not always be ignored.
Consanguineous marriages, the biological legacy of the British monarchy. The history of the British monarchy reflects centuries of matrimonial strategies designed to consolidate power and ensure the dynasty's continuity. Although not as extreme as in the cases of the Egyptian pharaohs or the Habsburgs, the practice of consanguineous marriages played a crucial role in shaping the British royal lineage, leaving its mark on the genetic and political history of the family. In the Middle Ages, when marital alliances carried strategic weight, King Edward III married his second cousin, Philippa of Hainault. This marriage consolidated an important alliance between England and the county of Hainault, strengthening the position of the Plantagenet dynasty in Europe. Edward and Philippa had 14 children, whose descendants played a central role in British and European politics for centuries to come. The peak of this consanguineous tradition occurred during the reign of Queen Victoria. Victoria, known as the Grandmother of Europe, married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Together, they had 9 children, who later married members of royal families across Europe, creating an extensive kinship network among the continent's monarchies. This system of marital alliances aimed to ensure political stability and strengthen ties among monarchies during a period of growing tensions. However, endogamy within the British royal family also had notable biological consequences. Queen Victoria was a carrier of the gene for haemophilia, a genetic disorder affecting blood clotting. This gene was passed on to several of her descendants, including her daughters Alice and Beatrice, who introduced the condition into the royal families of Germany, Russia, and Spain. One of the most notable cases was that of Tsarevich Alexei, the son of Princess Alix of Hesse, Victoria's granddaughter, who suffered from haemophilia in the Russian imperial court. In the 20th century, consanguineous marriages began to decline within the British monarchy. Although Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, were third cousins and direct descendants of Queen Victoria, Their union reflected changing royal marital customs. Alliances moved away from close family ties, aligning with greater awareness of genetic implications and evolving social norms. Hemophilia, known as the royal disease, and other genetic disorders resulting from endogamy left a tangible legacy on European dynasties. As modern monarchies evolved, their matrimonial strategies transformed, reflecting a balance between tradition and adaptation to changing times.
The inherited chain, endogamy and its persistent effects on modern genetics. Modern genetics continues to uncover the traces that endogamy has left in various populations throughout history. While this practice was historically a tool to consolidate power, its consequences today are primarily observed in isolated communities or those with traditions that still favor consanguineous marriages. Far from being solely a historical issue, the effects of these decisions continue to influence the genetic health of individuals and communities. One notable case is that of Pingelap Island in Micronesia. In the 18th century, a catastrophic typhoon decimated the population, leaving about 20 survivors as the genetic foundation for future generations. This bottleneck event drastically reduced genetic diversity, allowing recessive mutations to proliferate. Today, around 10% of Pingelap inhabitants suffer from achromatopsia, a condition causing complete color blindness, while nearly 30% are carriers of the gene. This example illustrates how reduced genetic variability can amplify specific health issues in small populations. In the Middle East and South Asia, consanguineous marriage rates remain high due to cultural and social factors. These regions have documented increases in genetic disorders such as thalassemia, a hereditary anemia, and rare metabolic diseases. According to studies published in scientific journals like The Lancet, up to 60% of marriages in some communities in these areas are between cousins, significantly increasing the prevalence of recessive diseases. The Amish communities in the United States provide another contemporary example. This population, descending from a small group of 18th century European immigrants, has remained genetically isolated due to strict religious and social norms. As a result, rare genetic diseases such as Ellis Van Creveld syndrome, a condition causing dwarfism and congenital heart defects, are much more common among the Amish than in the general population. Advances in modern genetics have helped address some of these issues. Tools like DNA analysis and genetic counseling, pioneered by figures such as Sheldon Reed in the 1940s, offer communities the opportunity to mitigate the risks associated with endogamy. In places like Saudi Arabia, mandatory premarital screening programs help identify couples at high risk of passing on hereditary diseases. Despite these advances, challenges persist. Endogamy reflects not only biological decisions, but also deeply rooted cultural and economic dynamics. Its impact, spanning from Pacific Islands to urban communities, highlights the importance of integrating genetic knowledge with culturally sensitive approaches to address its effects. This enigmatic puzzle of inheritance not only tells stories of the past, but also compels us to confront contemporary realities. The interaction between genetics and human decisions, far from being a resolved issue, continues to shape the health and destiny of populations today. Inbreeding and mental health, the invisible price of genetic purity. Historically, inbreeding has been analyzed primarily for its physical effects on royal dynasties and isolated communities. However, its impact goes beyond genetic malformations and physical health issues. Modern studies have revealed a direct relationship between inbreeding and the development of psychological and neurocognitive disorders, from schizophrenia to depression and intellectual development disorders. Generations of consanguineous marriages have left lasting marks on the mental health of individuals born in these environments. Documented cases in European royalty, isolated Amish communities, and groups of fundamentalist Mormons demonstrate how inbreeding can affect the emotional stability and neurological functionality of their descendants. One of the most notorious examples of inbreeding's impact on mental health is the Habsburg dynasty. This family, which ruled vast European territories for centuries, took inbreeding to extremes in an attempt to preserve power and prevent the fragmentation of their domains. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg monarch on the Iberian Peninsula, not only suffered from severe physical and reproductive issues, but also exhibited significant cognitive decline. Historical records describe his inability to process information clearly, make strategic decisions, and maintain emotional stability. His anxiety crises, depressive episodes, and learning difficulties serve as evidence of the psychological effects of a dynasty that, after generations of consanguineous marriages, had reached a critical point of degeneration. But Charles II was not an isolated case. Other branches of the Habsburgs, particularly in Austria and the Roman Empire, also showed patterns of mood disorders, anxiety, and cognitive deficits. The accumulation of recessive genes within the family amplified the prevalence of these issues, weakening the dynasty's ability to govern effectively. Beyond royalty, inbreeding has also been observed in closed communities where religious or cultural norms favor marriages within the same group. Among the Amish in the United States and fundamentalist Mormons, the effects of inbreeding have been studied for their impact on mental health and neurological development. In the Amish, a community that has remained isolated for generations, an increase in the prevalence of rare genetic disorders and neuropsychiatric problems has been documented. Studies have identified high rates of autism, intellectual disability, and schizophrenia in certain families, resulting from a limited gene pool. Fundamentalist Mormons, who practice marriage within their group to preserve their cultural and religious identity, have also experienced a rise in severe psychiatric disorders. In some settlements in Utah and Arizona, an increased incidence of early-onset schizophrenia has been observed, prompting researchers to explore the relationship between inbreeding and neurodegenerative diseases. Beyond psychiatric disorders, inbreeding also affects individuals' neurological development. Research in genetics and neuroscience has demonstrated that genetic impoverishment increases the likelihood of cognitive deficits, learning difficulties, and problems with emotional regulation. The National Institute of Mental Health has identified that in populations with high levels of inbreeding, cases of attention deficit, low social adaptability, and difficulties in processing emotional stimuli are more frequent. This is due to the expression of recessive genes that affect brain formation and function. Inbreeding not only compromises physical health, but also alters emotional stability and the ability to socialize. In societies where cooperation and decision-making are essential for survival, these effects can create structural weaknesses that jeopardize community cohesion.